It was supposed to be an ordinary trip to the supermarket, but a completely deranged woman decided that my black son couldn't be mine because I'm white. Just when I thought nothing could get worse. She pulled out a knife and made a scene worthy of a horror movie. Supermarket. Sunday afternoon. That's where it starts. No one in their right mind enjoys queuing for miles, stuck trolleys, and self-service checkouts that fail the one time you decide to use them. But there I was, Mark Reynolds, trying to survive this commercial jungle with my 5-year-old son Elijah by my side, holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur as if it were a shield against the chaos. The mission was simple: buy milk, bread, and some groceries for the week. But of course, life had other plans. Or rather, a certain crazy woman did. I had already noticed the look. You know, when you feel someone watching you, but you try to ignore it? That's exactly what happened. From the moment I entered the market, that blonde woman in her 50s, who I would later learn was named Patricia Whitmore, stared at me as if I had just broken into her house and stolen her silverware. My first instinct was to think that maybe she was just another clueless person lost in thought. But no, every corridor I passed, she was there, eyes wide, hands clenched around the trolley, pushing it slowly, like a predator following its prey. In the cereal aisle, I tried to ignore it. In the dairy aisle, I started to get uncomfortable. When I got to the checkout line, I knew it was no coincidence. That's where everything went off the rails. As I was putting the products on the conveyor belt, I felt a sudden movement behind me. I looked to the side, and before I could react, Elijah was gone. Panic hit me like a punch in the stomach. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. Patricia was holding my son by the hand, pulling him away as if she were rescuing a lost child. It took my brain a second to process, a second longer than it should have, because by the time I realized what was happening, she was already 3 steps away, holding Elijah tightly and looking at me with a disgust that made me want to vomit. Rebecca Chun, a young Asian woman in scrubs who had been in line behind me, looked up from her phone, confused by the commotion. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting between me and Patricia. Patricia's voice came out with an absurd authority, as if she were the sheriff of the world. "Where is the mother of this child?" The question hung in the air for a moment. I opened my mouth. I closed it. I opened my mouth again. "Me. I'm the father." Did she have an eye problem? Patricia squeezed Elijah's hand even tighter, and he started to get scared. And that's when I knew this wasn't just some prejudiced bastard. This woman really thought she was about to save child. And what about me? I was about to lose control completely. "He can't be yours," Patricia said loudly, looking around as if seeking validation from other shoppers. "Look at him, then look at you." "I'm not stupid." Rebecca stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Excuse me, but stay out of this." Patricia snapped. "I'm protecting this child." The world around me disappeared. All that existed at that moment was my son being pulled away by a completely deranged woman. The noise of people talking, the beeps of the cashier registering purchases, the promotional announcement over the loudspeaker. Everything became background noise. My feet moved before my brain could even process it. I took a step forward and reached out to take Elijah back, but Patricia stepped back as if she were holding a bomb about to explode. Her eyes were wide, filled with a sick certainty. And what's worse, no one around seemed to notice that anything was wrong. To outsiders, she was just a lady holding a child's hand while a man, me, tried to pull him back. An older white couple nearby started watching intently. The husband leaned over to his wife and whispered something. She nodded solemnly. Were they agreeing with Patricia? I felt my blood boil. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, because I knew that if I started shouting or tried to pull him out of her arms, I would be seen as the aggressive one. After all, I'm a white man, and she was, well, blonde, white, and with that look of someone who always gets what she wants. Elijah's hand was clasped in hers, small, fragile, trembling. He looked at me with tear-filled eyes, not understanding what was happening, just feeling the fear grow. "Let him go. Now." My voice came out firmer than I expected. No shouting, no lack of control, but charged with an anger that burned deep in my throat. Patricia took a step back. The way she looked at me, God, it made me sick. It was like she was staring at a monster. "He's not your son." I saw the fear in his eyes. "You can't fool everyone." Shock ran down my spine. I didn't know what revolted me more. The fact that she was absolutely certain of her own madness, or the fact that some people in the queue started paying attention, as if somehow she might be right. The older white man who had been whispering to his wife stepped forward. "Maybe we should call someone," he suggested, his tone implying he wasn't sure who to believe. Rebecca, however, had pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this," she announced. "Ma'am, you need to let go of that child right now." "You don't understand," Patricia said, turning to Rebecca with wild eyes. "This man is trafficking this poor child. Can't you see they don't match? That's what scared me the most. If I screamed, if I pulled Elijah hard, all it would take was for some idiot to film the scene from the wrong angle, and suddenly, I'd be in the headlines for yet another tragic case. But I couldn't let this crazy woman take my son." I looked around, trying to find any support, any sign that anyone there understood that a child was being kidnapped in front of everyone's eyes. That's when a security guard started to approach. He was a large black man dressed in that generic blue uniform, and he looked at me with a mixture of caution and doubt. Damn, Patricia saw the security guard coming, and instead of realizing she was wrong, she doubled down. "Hurry up, call the police. That man is trying to take that child." The security guard stopped in the middle of the aisle. The seconds stretched out. I felt my heart pounding in my neck. And that's when Elijah started crying loudly, the kind of desperate cry that only a terrified child can let out. "Daddy, Daddy," he wailed, trying to pull away from Patricia toward me. The security guard's expression changed. He glanced at Patricia, then back to me. "Sir, is this your son?" "Yes," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "His name is Elijah Reynolds. He's 5 years old. His birth certificate is in my wallet. Please." "He's lying," Patricia shrieked. "Look at them. They don't even look alike." Rebecca stepped closer, her phone still recording. "The boy is clearly calling him Daddy. He's terrified of you, not him." And in that instant, something changed. The security guard frowned. People around started whispering, and Patricia's mask began to crack. Because for the first time, someone realized that the real fear wasn't on her face. It was on Elijah's face. But instead of giving up, instead of letting go of his hand and backing away, she pulled a knife out of her pocket. The glint of the knife made my stomach sink. The world, which was already in slow motion, seemed to stop completely. What had once been an absurd and revolting situation had now turned into a nightmare. She held the blade firmly, as if ready to use it. The hand that was still clutching Elijah was tense, the fingers white from the force. "Oh my God," Rebecca gasped, backing away slightly but still recording. I felt the air go out of me. The security guard, who had seemed uncertain before, took a step back. Yes, backwards, as if he wasn't trained to deal with it, as if he wasn't sure who the real threat was. "Everyone stay back," the guard commanded, speaking into his radio. "We have a situation at checkout 3. Woman with a knife." The older couple who had been watching now retreated in fear, the woman clutching her husband's arm. But the husband seemed oddly conflicted, as if part of him still believed Patricia's claims despite the knife. Patricia was breathing heavily, her eyes scanning the crowd around her. Perhaps she realized that the situation was getting out of hand. Perhaps she felt the weight of the stares on her. But she still didn't let go of Elijah. I knew that any wrong move could end badly. Very badly. Because now I wasn't just trying to get my son back from a crazy woman. Now I was facing someone who had a knife and who, it seemed, was willing to go to any lengths to prove that she was right. The supermarket, which had previously seemed like noisy chaos, plunged into absolute silence. People stopped in the middle of the aisles. Employees froze at the checkouts. It was as if everyone there knew that the next second would define everything. And in the middle of it all, Elijah was crying. He was shaking so much that I could see his knees wobbling. Small, helpless, not understanding why a strange woman was holding him and why his own father was doing nothing. My head was spinning with possibilities. I could lunge forward and try to tear him away from her. But what if she reacted? What if the blade was too close? What if in confusion he hurt himself? I could scream, but wouldn't that scare her even more? I could. And then she spoke. "If you take another step, I swear I'll cut that filthy hand off." The blood drained from my face. The world, which already seemed to be falling apart, cracked completely. That wasn't just a fit of rage. It wasn't just prejudice disguised as concern for a child. This was pure hatred. Patricia wasn't just convinced that Elijah wasn't mine. She didn't accept the idea that he could be. My breathing became heavy. My whole body was screaming at me to do something, to get my son out of there and get over with. But any wrong move could make everything worse. Rebecca had inched closer, her phone still recording, but her free hand now reaching into her scrubs pocket. "Ma'am, I'm a nurse at Metropolitan Hospital," she said calmly. "Why don't you let me take the child while you and this gentleman sort things out?" Patricia's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You're with him, aren't you? You're all in on it." The older man who had retreated earlier suddenly called out, "Just let the boy go, lady. Can't you see you're scaring him?" Even his wife, who had seemed to believe Patricia initially, now tugged at his arm in agreement. "This has gone too far," she murmured loudly. The crowd was turning against Patricia, and she could feel it. Her eyes darted more frantically now, the knife in her hand trembling slightly. And that's when a noise cut through the silence. A dry crack, loud enough for everyone in the market to hear. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a scream. It was the metallic voice of the supermarket's loudspeaker, manually activated by an employee at the checkout. The police are on their way. Patricia's blade trembled. And for the first time that night, she hesitated. The voice from the loudspeaker seemed to freeze time. The words echoed throughout the market, sharp as invisible blades. The police are on their way. Patricia's face changed instantly. For a brief second, she no longer just looked furious. She looked scared, but not an ordinary fear, like that of someone who has realized they have done something wrong. It was the fear of someone who can't accept losing. Sweat dripped down her forehead, her fingers still gripping the knife tightly, but now trembling. Her gaze oscillated between me, the security guard, the people around her, and the market door. She was calculating, trying to decide whether it was worth continuing or running away. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my ears. The arm holding Elijah was still trapped in her hand, and I could see his little chest rising and falling rapidly, panic consuming every bit of his fragile body. But for the first time that night, the power was no longer with her. The whole market could see the scene clearly now. Before, people looked on from afar, uncertain, perhaps even believing the absurd story she tried to push. But now she was just a crazy woman holding a child and knife, surrounded by witnesses, and with the police on their way. And that infuriated her even more. Her lips twitched in an expression of pure hatred. Her face red with rage. It was as if everything was slipping through her fingers, and she refused to accept it. Rebecca had slowly circled behind Patricia, her eyes communicating something to me. I wasn't sure what she was planning, but I needed to keep Patricia's attention on me. "Patricia," I said, using her name for the first time, "you know this isn't right. Deep down, you know Elijah is my son." "Shut up," she spat. "You people always think you can just take whatever you want." "You people," I repeated, feeling a new wave of disgust. So it wasn't just about Elijah and me. It was about her prejudice against interracial families. In the tense silence that followed, I noticed Rebecca carefully removing something from her pocket, a small can of pepper spray, the kind nurses often carry for safety on late shifts. And then Patricia made her last decision of the night. Letting go of Elijah's hand in one sudden movement, she turned her body and ran. I didn't even have time to react. As soon as her hand let go of his, I pulled him to me and hugged him tightly, feeling his little body still trembling. The knife fell to the floor with a metallic clang. The marketplace erupted in murmurs, shouts, and hurried footsteps. Some people moved away, others grabbed their cell phones to record. The security guard finally had the courage to act and ran after her, but he wasn't fast enough. Patricia scurried down the corridor like a cornered rat, but there was nowhere to go. When she reached the door, she found two policemen already entering the market, guns in their hands, postures rigid. Her face went white. She froze in mid-stride, her eyes wide, as if her brain wasn't ready for that outcome. I squeezed Elijah against me, feeling his small hands gripping my shirt tightly, as if he wanted to merge with my body and never leave. Patricia looked at the policeman. She looked at the market. She looked at me. And then, for the first time that night, she knew there was no way out. The instant between Patricia realizing she was trapped and her reaction was one of the strangest moments I've ever experienced. Because for a second, it seemed as if she really didn't understand why she was being stopped, as if in her head, it still made sense. But any chance of escape died there. The policeman advanced, one of them ordering her to put her hands up. The tone of voice left no room for discussion. And that's when her mask fell for good. Her face, which had once been red with anger, turned pale. Her eyes wide, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her whole body was shaking. Perhaps it was the weight of reality finally hitting. Perhaps it was the shock of realizing that no one there was going to defend her. She was no longer in control of the situation. One of the policemen approached slowly, hand on his holster, prepared for any unexpected move. The entire market watched in absolute silence, as if no one dared to breathe. And then Patricia fell to her knees. She simply collapsed to the ground. "I just wanted to help," she mumbled, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. Rebecca, who had rushed back to my side to check on Elijah, shook her head in disbelief. "Wanted to help by pulling a knife on a child? What is wrong with you?" The policeman didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and grabbed Patricia's arms, handcuffing her unceremoniously. The sound of the metal locking around her wrist was the most satisfying sound I've ever heard. The crowd let out a collective sigh. Some took out their cell phones to record. Others simply shook their heads, as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But me? I wasn't even looking at her anymore. I could only look at Elijah. He was still clinging to me, his face hidden in my chest, his small hands gripping my shirt so tightly that I knew they would leave marks. His body was shaking. His heart was beating fast. And that's when I realized how dangerous it had really been. He could have been hurt. He could have been taken. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The policeman approached me, his expression serious, but with a look that seemed to say, "I know you've been through hell. Do you want to press charges?" he asked directly. I laughed low, bitter. Complaint? After what that woman did. After everything that almost happened. I looked at the remains of the mess around me. The knife still on the floor. The lost looks on the faces of the staff. The customers whispering amongst themselves. And I looked at Patricia, now sitting on the floor, handcuffed, finally with no control over anything. Of course. The policewoman nodded and wrote something down on her notepad. As the police led Patricia away, a small debate broke out among the witnesses. Some were outraged, demanding the maximum penalty for her actions. Others, surprisingly, expressed concern about her mental state. "She must be mentally ill," one woman argued. "No sane person would do something like that." "That doesn't excuse what she did," Rebecca countered firmly. "Mental illness isn't a free pass to terrorize a child." The older man, who had initially seemed suspicious of me, approached with his wife. I want to apologize," he said awkwardly. "When I first saw what was happening, I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong." His wife nodded. "We both were. I'm so sorry you and your son had to go through this." Their apology was unexpected, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to be angry that they had doubted me even for a second, but another part recognized the importance of their acknowledgement. "Thank you," I said simply. "It matters that you said that." As the commotion settled, Rebecca handed me her business card. "If you need a witness statement for the police, or if Elijah needs any medical attention, please call me." What that woman did, it's unforgivable. I took another deep breath and held Elijah in my arms, feeling the warmth of his little body and swearing to myself that I would never let anything like this happen again. As we left the store, escorted by a now apologetic security guard, I couldn't help but wonder how many other families had suffered similar suspicions without the dramatic climax. How many quiet judgments, stares, and whispered comments did interracial families face daily? For me and Elijah, this ordeal was over. But the conversation it sparked about race, family, and who belongs together was just beginning. What would you have done in my situation? Have you, or anyone you know, ever faced similar prejudice, even without the knife? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to see more stories that spark important conversations.